So thank you very much for showing interest and joining in this call. So what I'm going to talk about today is all about containers in Azure. So what are the different ways by which you can run container in Azure? So I will walk you through all those spaces, and then I will be briefly deploying a small sample application, which I will also demonstrate later point in time how to build that, and then do it in front of you to just have an experience, right? So let's jump into the content. But before I jump into the demo, I would like to basically have this slide in front of you. So this is the content slide, which I will be posting in the video description. So if you come back later point in time, you will get all the links in the video description, which you can use it later point in time. So I wanted to highlight the first link, which is basically the home page for all my tech talks, which I plan this month onwards to kind of deliver it on a regular basis. So you will get to know about them, what is coming up, or you can also even watch the past events. So if you, let's say, have sort of like a plan to register or know what is happening, so you can always sign up to the meetup group. There is a link to the portal already, which is a meetup group. And if you sign up for that, and whenever I announce an event, I always announce in the meetup group, and I will send you the link. That meetup group will be sending you an email, so you don't have to come back to my link again and again, right? So there are a couple of ways by which you can follow me. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, where I try to post on a regular basis the videos. I've got blogs available, which I post all my videos there, and then some articles. You can also reach out to me via LinkedIn or Twitter, right? So there are many ways by which you can contact me and reach out to me. So without further ado, what I'm going to do, I'm going to just share my screen and then start showing you the thing, right? So what I have is that today now I have got an Azure portal access. So I went into portal.azure.com. That's where I can start working on it, right? And then I can continue to create resources in this portal one by one. So what essentially I'm planning to do is that I'm planning to create everything from scratch. So let's see how that experience looks like. So what I've done is that I can either create a resource from this portal by clicking on the plus icon and then create. That's more of a wizard-based experience, which will give you some sort of flavor of how you can work with Azure. But in real scenario, you don't do these things, right? So you basically go ahead and create set of instruction via script, right? And I will be using one of the kind of scripts which you can use, which is Azure CLI. So let's see how that experience looks like. So to work on Azure CLI, you can use any kind of way to achieve that. You can use our Azure CLI from the browser. So we have something which is already available in Azure portal, which allows you to open the browser. And that browser is basically the same kind of browser which you use to open the Azure portal, but it shows you the command prompt in browser. So you do not need any local installation. Otherwise, if you prefer to have your own Azure CLI component installed, you can always install those AZ CLI command prompt in your local machine. You can launch them either by, if you're using Windows, by command, that is bash window, or PowerShell, or the WSL, which is what I'm using now, right? I have got a WSL. Now, what I have here is basically a dev machine running in Azure somewhere, anywhere. It doesn't matter. It's an Ubuntu machine, right? So it's a Linux machine. And I have got my tools installed here. So I have got my Azure CLI. I've got my all the command like kube control, etc. All of them are available. So just to show you what I have here. So if you type AZ, so it shows you the AZ CLI command prompt. That essentially means that you have got the Azure CLI, right? So it's configured. So you can install it just following the documentation available through snapd. It's pretty easy, right? I also I'm logged into that. So if you use AZ login, it logs in. But if you say account list, it shows you if you're logged in and what all accounts you have access to, right? So I can see that I've got bunch of subscription I've got access to, right? So just in case you are not sure you are not logged in, you can always run AZ login, right? If you type that, what happens? It shows you a URL, and then it shows you a key. So if you copy this key and go to this URL, right? Control click, it should open a browser in your local machine, right? If you're using local machine, and then you can log in using that browser, right? Otherwise, you copy this URL. If you're using, let's say, headless server where you cannot load the browser, you can copy the URL and the code to another machine and then use that same credential which you need to log into that same Azure portal, and then it will automatically get synced up, right? So it doesn't need you to always use a machine which has got user interface. So I'm now logged in. Now, once I'm logged in, it shows me what all subscriptions I have access to. So you can see that clearly that I've got a subscription ID and etc. shown up over here. So let me clear that up. Now I'm going to create a resource group. Now to create a resource group, first what I need to do is that I'm going to use, let's say, let me increase the font size. I'm going to use the variable. I've got a variable. So let me show you that variable $G. So that's the name of my resource group. So it is RG container 3. And that resource group right now is not available in my Azure subscription. So if I go back to my, let's say, the subscription here, the list of resource groups in my portal, I've got RG container 2, which I created just for testing purpose, but RG container 3 is not available in this list, right? So what happens when I try to create this resource group? It's a fairly simple command, right? I can go ahead and then say AZ group, that's your resource group, and then say create. That's how the sequence looks like. So whenever you want to create a resource, you put AZ, the type of resource, and the command. And then you pass the variable G, which basically is the resource group name. And also another parameter is required, which is location. So the location is which data center you want to create this resource group to. So you can see that the location did not match. So if I type East US, it's going to go ahead and create. It's a pretty fast activity. So it's done, right? If I now go back to my portal and I refresh this list of resource groups available, you will see the RG container 3 showing up over here. So let me refresh this just to make sure that I'm in the right subscription, because sometimes a login can happen in another thing. Right? So let me just go ahead and go to home, resource groups, and I should have that resource group RG3 container 3 created in the subscription. So I'm okay at this point in time because I'm in a current subscription, all fine. Now, next thing I need to do is that I need to have an application, right? And that application will be pushed to this Azure, right? So let's play with application a little bit. So I already have done this application coding, right? And this is already available in form of a folder. So let me show you what that contains. So it contains a couple of folders. So the blue colors are the folders, and the white ones are the files. And it's a fairly simple website, right? It's just the first template website for Embassy application in .NET Core 5. So you can pick up any website. That's not a problem. What is important over here is that I need a Docker file. Docker file is a set of instructions in form of a text file, which essentially helps you build a Docker image. And to do that, you need to have a local Docker community edition or whatever edition you have installed in the machine. So I have got that. So if I run the Docker CLI, it shows up that Docker is kind of configured. The Docker CLI is configured just to ensure that Docker is running. So I'll say Docker PS, and it shows me that Docker is kind of running. So the service and everything is configured. That's what another thing you need to take care of. So this is your Docker running. So you say Docker PS, you see the Docker is running. If you say Docker images, then what all images I have in my local machine will be shown up in this list. So you have got a lot of images. So if you, let's say, clean up all of them, so all of the images will be gone. So if I, let's say, have to delete one image, I have to go one by one. So I can say Docker RMI. That's what you use to clean up the image, and you specify the name one by one, and then you say that I don't need this image in this machine, it'll be gone. So but if you have a reference to that image, and then it will basically have the problem. So you can always use the force command to delete the image, or you can delete all of them. So I'm not going to delete it, let it be here, because I'm going to create a new one. Now let's go back to the list again. So I just went back to the folder, and in this folder I have got a Docker file. So let's see how that content looks like. If I run the vim command, that's basically the editor, right? So you see that these are the set of instructions. So it shows what is the base image you want to use. Depending on the application, the base image URL will change, and it will download the base image and the set of instructions related to the runtime you're using for that application. So since I'm using .NET Core, it uses all the .NET CLI command like .NET Restore, .NET Build, .NET Publish, and all of them, which are essential for this Docker container to be created. So when it creates a container image locally, it uses these set of instructions. So what happens when I simply come out of this, let me just come out of this and then run a command, because I'm in the folder where my Docker file is. So if let's assume that there is nothing to do with the container. So if I'm simply using .NET, so I'll say .NET build. So it will start building the process. So it will basically restore all the thing. It'll start building, create the DLL. That's fine. So that's what, even within the Docker file, we have this command available. So it will run the same command. But when you just create a Docker image, you simply say Docker build. And because the Docker file is in the same folder, you don't have to mention anything else but a dot, and then it will run on that. Because I ran it multiple times, so it basically ran pretty fast. For the first time, it might take a while, a minute or two, to run all of these commands, right? So you essentially would be able to run this thing. But what happens if you just do this? It basically creates a Docker image. So if I say Docker images, and then you see that I've got no new images created right at this point in time, because nothing changed inside my code. So what I can do, I can create a new image or pick up an existing image and then tag it. But let's do it fresh. So create a new image. So if I now say Docker images, right, and then Docker build command, here I can tag it, right? So when I say tag, I'll say reju test. That's the name of my image. And if I put colon v1, that becomes the version of my image. If I run this command, what happens in this list of images, when I say Docker images, it will have a new image called reju test. And you can see that it shows you 2 hours ago. Even if I just now have created, because there is nothing changed, Docker did compile it before, and it checked if there is any change. If there is no change, then it'll be pretty fast, right? So there is no such thing. But if you come back inside and then change some of the files inside this application, it'll definitely recompile, because there will be a new change, right? So that's how this works. So Docker is pretty efficient in that way. So you can see that I can now tag my images. Now let's tag it more effectively. Now what I wanted to do is that I wanted to use this image not locally, but from outside, right? So if you let's say have to run your application from things like Azure, you need a public image. You cannot have this image locally. So let's create something, we call it Azure Container Registry. As the name suggests, it's where you put your image, and you can make it either public or private. So let's create that first. So if I go ahead and then create the Azure Container Registry, right? So ACR, we call it. So what essentially we need to do is that we need to give the name of that container registry, right? So let's just say that ACR. I can also do it from the portal. Both were fine. Now I say create, and then the name, I say WGACR3. Hopefully this is a unique name. And then I just put the group as G and $G. Hence, I don't have to type it again and again because that variable is still here. And then what I'm going to do is that I'm gonna give a SKU. So SKU is basically like what pricing tier I'm gonna use. So I'll say standard, and then I say admin enabled, which helps me get the username and password. Then I can log in from my command prompt, right? So what happens that it's pretty fast. You can see that ACR is created. Now let's go back to my portal. And then let's refresh this list. So, okay. Let me check where it got created. It got created in the container 2. I did not want to create it in container 2. So let me run this command. Let me go to the resource group 2 and delete this ACR3. And let me click delete. Okay, deleted. And then I come back over here, probably come over here and reset the variable. G equals to RG container. Okay, echo $G. Now it should pick up this variable instead of that variable. So let's just wait for the deletion process to finish. Successfully deleted. I go back to the resource group, go inside the container 3, run the same command. And it should now create our thing inside this one. It's still picked up. Okay, let me just quickly check. Yeah, this is inside. So let me refresh this, go here. Sometimes the browser is kind of a bit late, but it got created inside the resource group 3. That's what it says. Okay, so I'm not sure about this resource group. Okay, resource group is RG container 3. I have got RG container 3. Yeah, so it took some time to refresh. Okay, so the registry is now available in my Azure subscription, and you can see that I have got no repositories because it's just now created. It should be empty, right? So there is nothing available. So what is the name of the registry? The name of the registry is this one, right? And it has got a public URL available. That is this one, right? So let us copy this one. And then if you go to the access keys, right, that's how you basically interact with this registry. So you say that, hey, you know what? I basically have this URL, I have this username, and I have this password. So let's just keep it open and then try to log in. So when I go here and then try to log in, what I essentially can do, I can say clear, and I say Docker login. And then I put the URL, I put the username, that is just the first part of the name, and then I put the password. And this password is this one. So if at any point in time it is compromised, you can always regenerate. Now login successful, right? When login successful, what you can do, you can use one of your images, right, which is here available, and push it. But you notice here, none of these images using the same, let's say, name, right? The registry name. So we need to match that. So to match that, you can retag an image, or you can create a new image with the proper name, right? So what I can do, I can give this, not this one. give the URL. So let me copy the URL again, copy this here, and I say web3 version 1. Okay, so that's a v1 of the image I'm going to create. Now it is done, right? So if I say Docker images, you'll find this WGACR3 web3 v1 is there. Now I am logged into this Docker hub, my registry, the registry which I created. So I can say Docker push, and then the image slash web3 colon v1. Okay, if I do that, it's going to go ahead and push this image, which is significant in size, right, to my Azure subscription. Now, if I open the Azure subscription, you will see over here in this ACR under repositories, there is something, okay, because I just now have pushed the Web3. And Web3 could have multiple versions, so that's why you see that I have now V1. That's what I named it. And if I have to pull it locally, you can also use this URL, and it will pull the image locally. So that's what essentially it means. So I have now my image in a registry, right? So that's putting the image in the registry. Now, what about using this image, right? Now you have this image. So let's see how that using pattern looks like. Now this time, let's use the portal experience to create something to host this container in some managed service within Azure called container instances. So container instances is a runtime given to you where all the containers and infrastructure are being managed for you and on behalf of you by Microsoft. So you give a name, WGACI, okay? And then I say 3. And then you can see that it allows you to create this thing using an existing image, right? If you use a quick start image, it will pick up a hello world image. If you use Azure ACR, it will pick up from your existing subscription ACR. If you have a Dockerhub or other registry, you can always mention them over here, right? So you can choose what you want to do. So I'll choose ACR, Azure Container Registry. And if I do that, you can see that I've got multiple registries, right? I can pick up the ACR3, and it will show you the images I have got. So I've got a Web3 and a V1. So if I have more than 2 versions of the same image, you will see that in the dropdown. Because it's in the same subscription, it can pick up, right? So I can pre-populate these things from my existing subscription. So I go to networking. I don't choose the networking, and I give a DNS name. Now I'll say that web WG Web3, something like that, which has to be unique because it will be a public DNS. So you will be able to use this URL to access the application. Now I go to next. I don't want to do anything of that sort. I don't want to run the bash command. And if I say create, if everything is fine, it'll show. But if there is a problem, then we have to go to the command prompt and run some command, right? So let's see if this works, right? If it doesn't work, then we have that command prompt option, which has got better experience all the time, right? So let's see if that thing really works. Okay. Hopefully this will be successful. Sometime if there is an issue with accessing the ACR from the ACI, the registry is inaccessible due to the security restrictions, you might get an error. So that error is mainly the access error, right? Nothing wrong with this approach. So we should not be hopeful. Even if the status says created, we should wait till the time it brings down the image from the registry, right? If it fails, it'll fail, right? Now, while it is trying to do that, what I want to also tell you is that we have used Azure registry, right? You can also use Docker, right? Docker gives you an ability to really create a repository for free. So you can go to Dockerhub, create a login, and I say that I want to create a repository. So if you create a repository, you give a name. So you say that I want to give a name called Web3, and I say create, then the repository will get created. So the Web3 repository essentially is available to you now. Now you can create an image locally using the same name like this one, slash web3 with whatever version you want to specify, and it should be ready, right? So you can see that it's now ready. So it worked, which means it has no problem. Now, if I go into the containers section, I see the status of the container. It is running. If I go to the overview section, it'll give me the publicly available URL. And if I just copy the URL in a browser, let me just minimize this because this is not a big website. So if I just wanted to show you this URL in the browser with 5000, because I know that it is using 5000 port, it should show me something if it is working properly, right? That means the portal which I have built, that's a sample portal using ASP.NET Core 5, should show up, right? And depending on like what is there, it will start working as is. So there is no difference in the sense like how it looks like. So let's just give some time to warm it up, right? So let's just wait for a moment, and then it will get created. Now, what I essentially also would like to do is that I will come back to this a little later. I wanted to show you how you can move it to Dockerhub. Let's see that experience. Okay. Now, I logged in this thing using ACR, right? Using Azure Container Registry. So let me see if it runs without 5000. And this run without 5000. So let me try doing that. Should not take that long to respond. That means, let me check the status. Containers, it's still running. Logs, that application is well running fine, right? No such problem. Events, normal container creator successfully pulling the image. It's all fine. So it should run. So let's see what is stopping this thing to show up. It should not ideally show up. Ideally, it might be like this. So let me show you something which I have just now created. Is ACI this? I did the same exercise. I have it here. So let me run this and try to show you the 5000 is something required. And it should show something like this. So everything is fine. You will be able to see this portal, right? So this is how the experience looks like, right? So I have to really try again to come up with the conclusion why it is not working. But let's move on. Now, what I wanted to do is that now I wanted to move to Dockerhub. Now, this Web3 is where I wanted to move. I can push my local image to Dockerhub as well. Instead of me pushing all the time to Azure Registry, I can push it to Dockerhub or anything. But for that, I need login. Now, if you use Docker login, automatically it takes the Docker thing. But if you have to specify that, that means kind of like what URL you want to do. So you can give always the URL, and then it'll ask you to provide the username and password, and then move on. But because I have already done that, so the credentials are already available, right? So you can see that it's pointing me to the docker.com. So I am all right. Now I go to this images, and then I convert one of these images like this one, to a Dockerhub image. So if I do that, I say Docker tag. So we call it a retagging. So we say that let's pick up this image, okay? And then I say this, and I give a name to this new image. Sorry, that's the repository name, Web3 version 1. Okay. I need to also specify the version over here because I'm not using latest. So if you use latest, you don't have to explicitly specify. So now it got retagged. Now when you say retag, it basically adds an entry, not a new image, but just an entry. So you see that this is available to you. So you have got Web 2, Web 3, all of them available. Now, if you try to push this image, right? So if you say Docker images again, and then say Docker push, and then you pick up this image, right? This one, and you say this with the V1, that's version 1, and it goes ahead and then push that image to the Dockerhub, right? So you see here now, if I refresh this, it's gonna go ahead and then show you this something a few seconds ago. That's this one. That's just now I have done that, right? And you can see that all these things which are there, blah, 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 all of them shown up here, whatever I have done, right? So my repository is now in another public repository, which can be used to populate the image, right? Now, what I wanted to move on to is that I wanted to move to a phase where I'm going to basically go to this resource group and go inside this resource group and use this image to host somewhere else. Where is that somewhere else? Somewhere else could be a local, let's say, virtual machine, which is running a Docker runtime. But that's not the way we should be doing it, right? So to host an application, we should not be bothered about the infrastructure. That's the way to go, right? And that's why we used ACI. But let's say you go with the conventional app services that's hosting websites. So if you create an app service in Azure, that's what you host in a website too. You can go ahead and then say that I want to create an app service. And I choose the resource group that is container 3, okay? And I give a name, let's say web3. I don't have that, so let's find app wg web3. Okay, so that's fine. And then you can see that I have got a Docker container option. Now, in that Docker container option, I choose the operating system. So based on that, the Docker image will be hosted, right? So if you choose Windows, it'll be a Windows container. If it is Linux, it'll be Linux container. So you need to select that thing. So I created a Linux image, so it's a Linux container. So I choose the Linux, and then you can choose whichever location is preferred. So it's not mandatory that you have to always use the resource group location. You can use any location if you feel like. So what I can do now, I can basically go ahead and then say that, hey, okay, so sorry, I have got a question regarding, pipeline. So which pipeline is preferred ideally to push image to ACR? Is it build pipeline or a release pipeline? Definitely release pipeline, because build is where you are testing things locally, right? So you essentially can build it and check whether things are fine, and then finally push it to the ACR once the build is successful. So you should be doing it in the release pipeline. So let me hide that. And then you can see that I will be getting something like this, and then I don't want to use premium because that will kill all my money left here. So I'll say that I will choose the lower one, okay, the basic B1, and then I say next Docker. And this is where I can choose like what is the container I want to create from. So I can use the Azure Container Registry, and I can even use, let's say, any registry. Doesn't matter which registry you are working on. So whatever registry you need to pick up from, you can pick up. So it doesn't restrict you to only use the registry which belongs to this resource group. It needs to be in this same, let's say, subscription. So it's a bit slow, exploring, seeing things. So let me just wait for it. So let me see over here, wait for the ACR2. Let's see if that can populate the list here, just to divert from what we can do. We can also use Dockerhub. If you do the Dockerhub, it just needs an image name and tag. Now, if you say that I want to use this Web3 or Web2, I also have Web2, and then V1, that also works because then it can pick up. I do not have any startup command. Startup command is already in my Docker file. So let me show you what startup command means. So if I say vim docker file, you will see that at the entry point, right? So this is how my ASP.NET Core application starts, .NET and the DLL name, right? So if you have built a ASP.NET Core application locally, to run that, you say .NET run. Basically, it runs the DLL. So if you say .NET and the DLL name, it also launches that application. So that's the entry point. So that's why this container is always up and running, right? Okay, so let me quickly come out. Okay, now if I go over here, I don't need anything. I say next. Okay, and if everything is fine, that means my name, etc., whatever I provided is fine, then it should create an app service from a container image which is available somewhere, right? Somewhere either privately or publicly, and then it will be up and running for you in a app service. Now you can host your container within Azure App Service, which is a fully managed platform as a service, which can run your container images, right? So you don't always need to run it in ACI or Azure Kubernetes services, but we'll come to that point. So we'll see how Kubernetes responds to this kind of interactions, right? So this deployment will take some moment, right? So we'll not spend a lot of time over here. We'll go and explore the Kubernetes option. So I'll go to the home. I'll go to the container too. I created a Kubernetes cluster. So creating a Kubernetes cluster is pretty straightforward, right? And I've got a bunch of, let's say, resources available. So in fact, I would like to take you to a repository. So I have got a GitHub repo, which I demonstrated a couple of, I think last month. And then I've got set up scripts, which basically is a step-by-step guidance on how you can, let's say, create an application, Dockerize it, put it in ACR, put it in ACI, put it in AKS, and then all this ACR, that container registry, container instance, etc., which you need to create, are given as your CLI command. So in that AKS, I also have CLI command available, which essentially helps you create the AKS cluster. It's just fairly simple. You can also use the portal to create the AKS cluster. So I choose to use the CLI because it's convenient. So I have already created. That's what I mean to say. So it's there already. So let's just connect to that cluster, right? So I've got something like AZ, AKS, get credentials. Okay, and then what I need to do is that you need to provide the name WGAKS2, and then the group. It's in a separate group, so I'll say RG container 1, 2. Okay, not 3 because it's not there here 3. So the context is here. Now if I say kubectl get nodes, I'm not a good typist, so I don't type very fast. So what I essentially do is that I alias it with kubectl. What happens? You say get nodes, you get the same thing. So I don't need to type kubectl again and again. Now I might have some deployment already there. So let's see what all deployments I have. So get deploy. It will show me the list of deployments. So I have got one deployment running. What I can do, I can say k create a new deployment. So to create a new deployment, you use k create and say deployment and give a name. So let's say web3. Okay, any name you can give. And then you say port, which port you want to open. So I'll say port 5000. And then you say what image you want to use. Use this image, right? Let's use web2 v1. So you have this image already in the Dockerhub. So that's what it is, right? So if I go back and then refer you to the Docker portal, I think here, just to remind you that I've got a repository. Just go to that. And I have got this repository up and running, which has got a v1 and it's a web2, right? So you can pick up any image available in the Dockerhub. If there is a login required, you need to log in. There is a different way to do that. But essentially, this will create a deployment. Now in Kubernetes, when you create a deployment, it at the back, it creates pod, right? Number of pods, depending on how many replicas you need. So you can also specify that. So how many replicas you need, how many copies of the pod you need. And inside that pod, you will have the container, right? So that's how the structure of Kubernetes looks like. So Kubernetes doesn't host container. It hosts pod. And pod can be created in multiple different ways. You can directly create a pod. You can create a deployment, which will essentially create a pod and maintain it, state, monitor it. You can also create job, which will also create pod. So there are a couple of ways to do that. So we'll not go into that depth of Kubernetes discussion, but assume that what I'm trying to do is that I'm trying to create a container here in the Kubernetes, right? And then I created a deployment with the name called Web3. So if I run this, it is pretty fast. You can see that. Now, if I say get pods, it'll show you all the pods. And you can see that another pod, which is running for 122 minutes, because that's the pod which I created for testing purpose. And this is the newly created pod, which is just now up. And you can see that name of the deployment comes first, and the remaining is the random value. Because if by any chance the pod gets deleted or killed, it'll recreate a new pod, because that deployment just keeps monitoring that. Now, that's not enough for me to really run this application publicly, right? So let me just clear this mess up and then come over here and then show you that get pods. If I do that, I see 2 pods. But how do I access this pod? To access this pod, you need something, a kind of URL or an IP address. To get an IP address which is accessible outside of this cluster, there are a couple of ways. Now, we need to create something called service. Service is sort of like a load balancer, and then it allows the traffic to land internally within AKS or Kubernetes cluster hosted in Azure. So let's create a service. Now, what I am talking about now are all very generic to Kubernetes, right? It's nothing very specific about Azure. But when you run Kubernetes in any public cloud, you get an option to have a public IP address. That's the benefit. And to get that public IP address, you basically create a service of type load balancer. So we'll do that. So we'll say K, that's kubectl, expose. And then you say deploy. That's a deployment you want to expose. And you say Web3. And then you say port 5000, type load balancer. Load balancer. Should be fine. That's going to go ahead and create a service. You can see that service is created. If I say get SVC, that's a shorter form of service, you see a Web3 service is available, which essentially maps my 5000 port with some internal port. And this is my external public IP address. So if I copy this public IP address, come to any browser and type it with 5000, it should essentially pop up, right? The website. So it means that now I have got my same application running from Kubernetes as a container. So all of them are hosting containers. So I hosted container in Azure Container Instance. I hosted container in Azure Container Registry. Azure App Service, and I'm hosting the container in AKS cluster. And by the way, this is a public URL. You can even try this out at your end. Let me just try to run a notepad, put it over here, and this is how it looks like. So if you use this IP address at your end and then bang on this portal, it will show up in your browser also. So this is the thing which I just now have created. So you can, let's say, if you now keep changing thing, you have to do all the steps I have taken, right? So you have to first rebuild the whole image, make it a local Docker image, then push it to the Dockerhub or the Docker registry in Azure or any other places, and then run the build or deploy the thing as a deployment in AKS. And all of these stuff can be created within a DevOps kind of way, where you really don't need to do all this manual task again and again. Now, I have shown you the portal where I have got scripts, right? If you happen to go inside this portal, right? So just remember the name, it's a big one. I will probably give an URL in the same context. So, but this is in my GitHub page. So if you go inside that, what I have done is that I have got the same sample code which I'm using, right? There's no change over here. But what is important over here at this point in time is that I have got another cool thing, which is basically my CI/CD pipeline. And our CI/CD pipeline can be created in many different ways in different tools. What I'm using is a GitHub, right? And then GitHub has got something called GitHub Actions. Now, what this GitHub Actions does, it takes setup instructions from me and then runs every time there is a trigger. Now, what is this trigger in this GitHub action? This trigger is that whenever I have got any changes to this folder, any file getting changed, that means my code needs to be recompiled, re-dockerized, re-pushed to the registry, and then redeployed to the AKS cluster. If that is the case, right, that means I'm changing something in my code and then submitting it or committing it to the repository, right? Then this kick starts. That's the trigger, right? And then what happens, right? It runs through setup instructions. So you can see that it takes an Ubuntu image, runs the Docker build command, and it uses some credential. Now, if you are using something public, you don't need all of them, right? For example, if I have to use my Dockerhub thing, I don't need all of this. But if you're using something, you can use. So you can set this up in your GitHub repo about the secrets. So you can create the secrets. The secret, when you define a secret, you just give a name, and when you call, you just call in this way. So this is how you call secret, because I don't want my credentials to get exposed in a place which is publicly available, because you can also read this file. So I want to hide those certain information. I can put it in secret. You don't know what that secret looks like. I can only see it because I have a login to my GitHub, right? That's why bit of security is in place, right? So you can see that now it allows me to also log into the Azure portal, right, through Azure credentials. So basically it uses service account to do that. So I basically put that service account credential, that's app secret, app key, all these details in my thing. And once this is done, right, these are not like configuration information. Once this is done, basically it takes my YAML file, right, the deployment.yaml, and then deploys it into Kubernetes. So let me show you the YAML file as well. So let me go back. It has in the portal, you have got something called YAML, and I've got deployment YAML. So what I essentially have written in the command line through kubectl is a crude way of doing it. But when you put it in a DevOps, use YAML instruction. So that's how when we in Kubernetes, YAML is essential. So for example, if I run the past command where I kind of created the deployment, right? So if I say that I want to create this deployment, I just hide this 5,000, not necessary, and just make it smaller. Let's put it as a 4, okay? And then I want to build a YAML. So what I can do, I can say try run equals to client, and I say that's output, right? dep.yaml. So that will create an YAML file. So ls cat dep.yaml. Okay. Now I just need to do something else. Okay, so I have to say o YAML. Yeah, so now you can see that this is the YAML file, which essentially gets created out of that. So this is what I'm going to use in my DevOps pipeline. So that's the same setup instruction, but in YAML format, right? So in Kubernetes, you can produce this kind of YAML out of your kubectl command, and then can create those. You don't have to handwrite this YAML file. So it's not easy or easy to remember thing, right? So you'd start from something. So you start from this baseline, change the image. So if you, let's say, want to change the version number to latest, you change it here, and that's what your final YAML looks like. So you don't really start from API version colon apps. You don't do that. Nobody does that. They start from base, and then they do it. So you can see that it shows me replica 1 If I need more than one replica, I'll simply go ahead and say I want to change this to 2. So if I, let's say, go and replace this last one, insert, it will be 3 instances. I can change the name of the app to 4 to 5. It'll be so all these changes I can make. If I need to change the image to my ACR, so I'll say that I don't want this WG ACR 2 dot Azure cr.io slash web 2 colon v1. Then it becomes my Azure Container Registry. But you remember one thing, that this requires me to provide the credential, because this is not a public repository. So you need to essentially make sure that you are going to basically get the right rights to be able to insert. So you need to also make sure that alignments, etc., are correct. So that's then your YAML got changed. So now this YAML can be used to deploy the application. Now we're almost reaching at the end. So what I'm going to quickly do that, I'm going to quickly come out, and then without saving this, so I'll just come out of that and show you the experience of, let's say, building an app, right? So let's say that I go to cd home, clear ls cd region. So I'll have that right here. Plus, okay. I create a folder, sample, and I will delete it just to remind me, cd sample temp. And then here is where I'm going to show you the experience of building an app in .NET. It's really simple. Just notice here, a few commands, only a few commands. Okay, you can do it from Visual Studio, but if you are doing it from, let's say, this kind of thing, so you can say .NET, it's purely CLI enabled, new MVC sample2. I use this HTTPS MVC minus N. Sorry, the name of the app. Otherwise, it will not take minus N. And this app, there will be an app created automatically. So you see that there'll be a new folder, sample2, and then if I say ls minus L, the app is ready. What you need here, you need a Docker file. A Docker file that gives the instruction of creating the images. But let's say if you say .NET run, this will basically build the project and then run it, make sure that your application is running, then you containerize it, right? If the application has a problem, then making a container with a problematic application will crash the container hosting platform. It will not work. So you need to first make sure that, yes, this application is running. But because I'm using a headless server, I cannot host it in my local browser. Otherwise, if you are running it in your local machine, you can use this URL and then host it in the local machine. Another thing you can do, because this virtual machine I'm working on is in Azure, I can have a public IP address. In fact, I have a public IP address. If I enable the port like 80 or 443, depending on what my application looks like, I can use that public IP address from any machine using this port 5000 and then can access it. So there are multiple ways to really see the outcome, real outcome of that application in a browser. So this application is running. Now, all the things which you have seen, that you need a Docker file, which has got setup instruction, you can actually add it over here. In fact, I will again go back. Sorry, I'm going back again and again to this resource because this has got everything you need, right? So let me go to that. To here, and then if you go here in the sample, you have got Docker file, right? You can copy the content of the Docker file And this uses, notice here it uses version 3.1 because it's old, but I kept a new version, apparently new version here in the folder above, which basically tells you, let's say, sample web YAMLs. Do I have YAMLs? No, I should have in the scripts. Yeah, you can see that Docker file version 3.1, version 5. So if you pick up the version 5, you can use this Docker file. Or else, if you're using Visual Studio Code, Visual Studio Code also comes up with an extension which allows you to build a Docker file from an existing application. That's fairly easy, and I use that. I don't handwrite the Docker file. I go to the Visual Studio Code, and I say that I want Docker file for my application, and Visual Studio Code creates that for me. And I change if I need to change. So that's the kind of thing I wanted to demonstrate. I know it's a bit of a rush in terms of how I moved between things, but I wanted to really walk you through what all options you have today in Azure beyond having your own virtual machine running your own container, than to having something which is fully managed and more efficient in terms of running the container within a platform, right? So hope this was helpful. If you have any question, you can always post it in the chat window, or you can ask me later point in time, just to have that clarity that we will be coming up with future events. But let's enjoy the moment. Thank you again for joining. I will keep this session on for 1 more minute if there is any other question coming in, and I'll try to answer that. If no further question, and I think people have dropped from the call as well, so we will end this talk. Thank you again, and have a great weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy.